It's so complicated, convoluted, chaotic. It's hard to actually figure out what's what, but it's becoming clearer.
Named Diddy 77 times in court documents related to Tupac's murder.
What if every single conspiracy theory about Shakur was true? That's where we start tonight. Footage rolling, the sound of FBI files shuffling under harsh desk light, the clock ticking. We're not talking about a late-night Twitter thread or an aging hip-hop forum, but concrete FBI documents. Unearthed, not just glanced at, now evidence in a newly reopened case tied directly to the collapse of one of the biggest names in music, Diddy. The shock? The FBI never dismissed the wild idea that Shakur might be alive, off the grid, plotting his return like some real-life Machiavelli. For years, behind closed doors and locked evidence lockers, the FBI treated the Shakur is alive theory with the kind of seriousness normally reserved for organized crime and government overthrows. Why? Because everything about the original story stinks. The so-called drive-by, the vanished witnesses, the autopsy oddities, and then the decades of silence until now.
3 law firms on retainer. I don't know how much money is coming in, but I know that a lot of money is going out every single month for Diddy.
It's not just the government looking suspicious. As these files come to light, we start to see a bigger, meaner picture of betrayal, a web with the FBI at one end and the upper echelons of the music industry at the other. Was Shakur just collateral? A pawn traded away in some dark deal to keep the dollars flowing and the scandals buried? We hear about a music world at war, East versus West, but suddenly it looks less like a beef and more like a business plan. Staged outrage, staged drama, profits up, witnesses down. And all the while, 2 men, Diddy and Jay-Z, rise like phoenixes out of the carnage. Was this chaos really just a bloody smokescreen, orchestrated by industry friends who had the most to gain? Now we turn to that friendship, Diddy and Jay-Z. On the surface, it's 2 titans sharing celebratory drink, trading toasts at the Rock Nation brunch, their arms around each other, billionaires at ease. But look closer and the real story crawls out. Back in the late 90s, when Shakur was supposedly gone and Biggie followed him out, Diddy and Jay-Z both faced separate brushes with the law. Diddy caught up in that notorious nightclub shooting, Jay-Z arrested after a stabbing in Manhattan. What a coincidence. Both walked away, careers not only intact, but thriving. And right after that, they joined forces on albums, business ventures, and high society galas, a partnership that only grew tighter with each new headline. Forbes didn't just put them on a list, they put them at the top, year after year. As the bodies cooled, the dollars piled up.
I think that they don't want, if they was in any of those freak-off tapes, if they played a part in any of those Diddy sessions, they don't want it to get out to the general public to make up their brand.
We've all seen the photos, Jay-Z and Diddy back-to-back at award shows, side-by-side at high roller parties, even donating $1 million on live TV in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. There's the public version, the brotherly hugs, the playful banter, the endless self-congratulation. But behind those grins, people who knew them in the late 90s insist that what we're watching isn't just friendship. It's a business alliance with the same ruthless, calculating energy as a boardroom coup. One ex-road manager from that era still calls them gatekeepers, not artists, but power brokers who only smiled when the path ahead was clear. Whenever I get in trouble, Jay-Z is the one I call, Diddy once declared on stage, the crowd loving it. But in hindsight, it hits different. Why did Diddy need a strategist? What sort of trouble did he anticipate? And who was in their way? The answer that keeps returning is Shakur. His last days read like the final act of a thriller. Paranoia, warnings, close calls, cryptic interviews. Some industry veterans swear he knew the hit was coming. And if you look at his lyrics, his interviews, even the eerie timing of his albums, it's hard not to get a chill. The beefs with Bad Boy, the veiled threats, the public feuds were one thing. But the sudden escalation, Shakur shot down in Las Vegas, then Biggie 6 months later, both unsolved, both at the heart of the so-called Coast War, well, it starts to look like a culling, not a random act. Add to this the whispers that Diddy put a bounty on Shakur's head, claims repeated by Dwayne "Keefe" D. Davis in police interviews and in his own memoir. Though now, sitting in jail, Davis seems eager to muddy his own story.
Now, why was he calling me, reaching out to me?
But let's step into the deep end of the rumor pool. The theory, once pure fan fiction, now popping up in leaked FBI documents, the fake departure contract. It's a story that refuses to fade away. The idea that, faced with the very real threat posed by industry rivals, namely Diddy and, in the latest twist, Jay-Z, Shakur turned to the only force more powerful than the music labels, the government. The theory says the FBI needed a wedge to bring down death row, so they offered Shakur a deal. Disappear, let the chaos play out and live on under new protection, perhaps in Cuba or Malaysia or who knows where. Maybe he's the pawn in a plan he never wanted to join. Every detail feeds the legend: the supposedly botched autopsy, the body never viewed by the public, the coroner's report with the wrong height and weight, the retirement of the man who handled his cremation, the cryptic words from his mother that Shakur chose to leave quietly.
Their thing, and I was big man. That was the extent of our beef.
Skeptical? Try explaining the parade of Shakur sightings, from blurry videos in Cuba to Suge Knight's offhanded "Wish Shakur, you never know," to the sudden flood of posthumous albums. His own lyrics seem to foreshadow it all, talking about his own exit, about faking out enemies, about returning when the time was right. The clues in the Machiavelli album, the rearranged letters, the hints at resurrection, the exit Shakur, enter Machiavelli on the liner notes. The FBI, if the files are legit, never closed the book. Why would they unless something big was left unresolved? All of this might sound like late-night smoke. But here's where the tension explodes. With Diddy's name splashed across headlines again, this time facing charges ranging from trafficking to racketeering, suddenly the past is crawling out of the vault. The allegations stack up not just from former partners but from new lawsuits tying Diddy and Jay-Z together at places, parties, and allegedly acts that now seem chillingly relevant. Jane Doe's recent suit, the mounting legal heat, the silence from Jay-Z. What are they hiding, or who are they protecting? A former assistant to Diddy once put it bluntly: "My life was in danger, not metaphorically, literally." We watch as the dominoes tip. Biggie gone, Shakur vanished, Diddy and Jay-Z untouchable, billionaire status achieved. The industry forever changed.
Now, I ain't trying to say that's some kind of conspiracy, and maybe some other shit was going on, or this, that, and the third. But brother, he had that conversation with Kay Slade 2 weeks before he was murdered.
So we circle back to the most tantalizing question. What if Shakur saw it all coming? What if he's out there, not just watching, but waiting, armed with the truth about how the gatekeepers seized the throne? If he returns, if he ever breaks cover, what does he know? And how many more secrets will finally come crashing into daylight? The deeper we go, the more the shadows crawl out from under the spotlight, and now we hit the most unexpected player in this whole drama: Beyonce. For years, her story ran in parallel to Jay-Z and Diddy, always close, always visible, but never directly involved in the chaos that swirled around them. We remember the early 2000s, Beyonce, barely 20, stepping out with Jay-Z, already one of New York's rising moguls, but she didn't just date into power. She worked with both men, blurring the lines between creative partnership and industry allegiance. When Beyonce dropped Summertime in 2003, Diddy jumped on the track. A few years later, the world saw Jay-Z and Diddy at her side at every possible event, grinning for the cameras while history quietly rewrote itself. Was Beyonce just caught in the gravitational pull of two kingpins? Or did she understand more about the cost of their ascent than anyone else dared to admit? You have to ask, how could she not notice? As Jay-Z's empire ballooned and Diddy's circle shrank under mounting legal storms, Beyonce's star only grew brighter. She was everywhere: the Oscars, the Grammys, her name a synonym for success. But her silence about Diddy's recent legal reckoning, especially with the lawsuits that now threatened to tear down decades of carefully constructed legacy, is deafening. There she is, still showing up at industry brunches, still hugging the same men the world is suddenly side-eyeing. Insiders whisper about the kind of loyalty that doesn't come free. Did her meteoric rise depend in part on not asking questions, or worse, on keeping secrets that could end careers if they ever surfaced? Nobody has forgotten that when Jane Doe named both Diddy and Jay-Z in her explosive suit, Beyonce said nothing, posted nothing, barely blinked. We're left staring at a woman whose every move is choreographed, but whose silence might speak volumes.
I want you to think about this. Allegedly, Sean Carter is responsible for enacting Hype Williams to put Aaliyah on a faulty plane to move her out the way as punishment for rejecting him, and so he could level up Beyonce.
If Beyonce knows something, and some say only she could put the final piece in place, her continued refusal to break ranks only fuels the paranoia. A longtime industry publicist told us, she doesn't just protect her own image, she protects the entire machine. The implication couldn't be clearer. The only thing bigger than Beyonce's voice is her discretion. The fact that she is the connective tissue between these men, the one person allowed into every private room, every off-the-record conversation, means the truth about Shakur might be closer than we think, just out of frame, hidden in plain sight. From this vantage, the whole East Coast versus West Coast saga starts to look less like a wildfire and more like a slow burn arson, lit and stoked by the very figures who stood to gain the most. We remember the headlines: rappers threatening each other on tracks, record labels egging on the rivalry, fans drawn into a narrative of street loyalty and vengeance. But step back. And the timing of it all looks suspiciously clean. Biggie and Shakur were both rising fast, each a symbol of their region, but the media blitz and corporate maneuvering behind the scenes had the subtle precision of a boardroom strategy, not a street fight. There were whispers, always denied, never confirmed, that Diddy and Jay-Z, still young but already playing chess, understood exactly how to keep the spotlight on themselves even as the chaos spiraled out of control.
And that was to destroy East Coast rap. And what I mean by that, and I know people gonna be like, yo, Gene is out of his mind and everything like that. Check this out, brother.
The release of diss tracks became a kind of orchestrated theater. Each insult volleyed from one coast to the other arrived with maximum press coverage and uncanny synchronicity to new album drops or record deals. Industry insiders, those who'd been around the table long enough to smell a setup, claimed that some of these so-called spontaneous outbursts were quietly mapped out in label offices, discussed over late-night calls and hidden meetings in Manhattan back rooms. It wasn't about loyalty or legacy, it was about creating a feeding frenzy that moved units and locked in cultural dominance. When the records flew off the shelves and the ratings soared, it wasn't just the artists who cashed in. The real beneficiaries were always the ones with the most to lose if the drama stopped. The gatekeepers, the moguls, the kingmakers, who saw conflict as currency. What most fans never saw were the contractual machinations beneath the surface. Insiders have long pointed to revenue spikes coinciding with the most notorious outbursts, and the same faces showing up at private gatherings, away from the cameras, just days before a new feud would erupt. Even the smallest details, the leaks to journalists, the cross-coastal rumors, the timed radio appearances, beg the question, how much of this war was ever real? Those closest to the action sometimes confess that the only thing more dangerous than an enemy in hip-hop was an ally with a contract and a calculator. In this narrative, Diddy and Jay-Z were never just survivors, they were architects, building a new empire out of manufactured chaos. There were other signs too, almost too obvious in retrospect. The infamous Source Awards in 1995, where Suge Knight's jab at Diddy seemed to set the rivalry ablaze, played out on national television with both men keenly aware of the cameras. The aftershock sent shockwaves through the industry, but in the months that followed, both Bad Boy and Roc Nation, then just a glimmer in Jay-Z's eye, saw their fortunes multiply. It was as if every public outrage, every headline, was a carefully placed chess piece. Jay-Z's steady ascent after Biggie's demise, Diddy's pivot from scandal to mogul status, even the way their own brands stayed just clear enough of direct violence to weather the fallout, it all points to a level of calculation that few dared to speak aloud at the time.
All new artists that was coming out of New York. Jay and Diddy was doing that. That's why when I heard your story, because I knew this for a long time, but when I heard Dame Dash that Jay wouldn't sign off on nothing.
Even law enforcement, as revealed in later years, considered the possibility that the blood feud wasn't just a tragic accident of egos, but an industry machine running on conflict. Retired detectives who worked those cases admitted that the sheer volume of record label involvement, the coordination of PR teams, and the stonewalling from industry lawyers complicated every investigation. The more they dug, the more the lines blurred between street crime and corporate maneuvering. The FBI itself, as those newly surfaced files show, spent years puzzling over how much of the East-West narrative was true and how much was just a profitable performance.
They all open doors. They laid the blueprint for me, and they're not here anymore. So I always want to make sure that, through me, you know what I'm saying, through all of us, so that.
By the time the dust settled and the smoke cleared, only a handful of names remained standing at the top: Diddy, Jay-Z, and those willing to play the long game. The casualties were real enough, but the story, as it's being rewritten now, is less about tragic rivalry and more about ruthless business. The chilling part is that all along, the public, fans, rivals, even the victims, may have been little more than extras in a puppet show where the biggest moves were made in silence for reasons that had nothing to do with music and everything to do with power. But the power in this story never stays with one person for long, and now the spotlight swings back to Shakur, if he's really out there, watching the world debate his legacy and waiting for the moment to make his move. The old conspiracy theories never quite faded away. Instead, they've evolved with the times. Now we've got Suge Knight's own son stoking the fires, tossing out photos and cryptic messages. "They fooled you guys the first time," he taunted online, claiming Shakur has been here. Of course, the photos show a man in Cuba, then Malaysia, then New Orleans. Each image more blurry and debated than the last. In one, a man who could pass for Shakur's twin lingers outside a Havana bar. In another, he's supposedly spotted talking to a group of fans in Kuala Lumpur. We're left to sort the signals from the noise, but the rumors refuse to burn out. The obsession isn't just about sightings, it's about the clues Shakur seemed to leave everywhere, like a chess player already planning the endgame. We hear the posthumous albums, 7 of them, at last count, and the cryptic wordplay, the references to faking one's own departure, the hidden messages embedded in Machiavelli's The 7-Day Theory. There's the infamous line, exit Shakur, enter Machiavelli. The rearranged letters, the coded track listings, the beats that drop like breadcrumbs. Fans pull apart every lyric, every album cover, every rare interview for some sign that Shakur intended to vanish, to beat his enemies at their own game by letting them think they'd won. Even his own mother, Afeni, stoked the speculation, telling a reporter her son had chosen to leave quietly. That's not the kind of thing you say if the story is simple.
This is the generation of rappers that Tupac was warning about. To the get a piece, to the poor kids get this, you know. So this is the generation that, if you go back and listen to Tupac's lyrics, he was warned us that these young kids were coming, that we was gonna have a race of babies who make the babies that hate the ladies.
And now, with the FBI suddenly dusting off files and the old case files landing on new desks, there's a fresh tension in the air. What if the Machiavelli prophecy wasn't just music, but a warning and a promise? If Shakur did cut a deal to vanish, to bring down the old empire and live on in exile, then every new legal blow to Diddy and Jay-Z is another sign that the system they built is cracked. Insiders say the FBI's interests never really faded. They just waited for the old guard to trip up, to get careless. Maybe the new round of indictments is less about the acts themselves and more about who might finally talk. This is what keeps the whispers alive, the idea that if Shakur walks out of the shadows, he doesn't just reclaim his own story, he brings down the men who built their fortunes on the ashes of his supposed absence. Imagine the fallout if he turned up at a press conference, evidence in hand, ready to tell the world what he saw behind the curtains. The consequences wouldn't stop with Diddy or Jay-Z. It would ripple through every corner of an industry built on image and illusion. Even Beyonce, so careful for so long, would have to decide where she stands. We watch as the clues multiply, the sightings continue, and the music itself becomes a kind of prophecy. And every day, the possibility grows that the greatest vanishing act in music history was never about escaping rivals or settling a feud. It was about buying time until the moment to return. The fear in Diddy's and Jay-Z's camps is almost tangible. Their former friends, people who toasted them on stage, who called them brother, now dodge the press, avoid direct answers, and sometimes just disappear entirely. Even Suge Knight, rotting in his own cell, sounds more like a ghost than a rival when he says, "With Shakur, you never know."
I'm quite sure everything, I am death row. Suge Knight is death row. So I'm quite sure, before it's said and done, all eyes on me and Machiavelli out of pocket, I'm definitely come back to me.
Maybe that's the only truth in the whole mess. With Shakur, we never do know. But for the first time in decades, the story doesn't feel closed. The world is waiting, every headline one step closer to something seismic. The only question left is how much longer we have to wait, and whether the people who've run the show for so long can survive what happens next. So let's put it all on the table. If Shakur really is alive, if the rumors are true, and he finally steps back into the world, what will Diddy and Jay-Z do? And is the industry, is any of us truly ready for what he might reveal? Drop your wildest theory or your boldest guess in the comments, because this story isn't over and the ending might just rewrite everything. Thanks for watching, stay sharp, and remember, in the world of music legends, nothing is ever quite as it seems.